Perfect. Good evening, everyone, once again. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar on applying to PhD programs in the US and everything around the application process for PhD programs. My name is Aditi, and I'm an Education USA advisor. I hope that, some of you have attended our sessions in the past, but if you are someone who's attending Education USA webinar for the first time, I'm going to just take another minute and, introduce you to who we are and what we do. And then I'm going to hand over to our guest today, and I'll, of course, introduce him before we get started with the actual presentation. So here we go. Education USA is your official source on US higher education. This is a very important piece of information that you should make a note. Education USA is a US Department of State supported organization. So in other words, Education USA is a US government supported organization. Our office literally exists, so that we can provide you with accurate, comprehensive, current information, but I think for me, more importantly, unbiased information. Being a US government resource, we represent all the accredited US universities, and there are over 4,000 accredited US universities. We, think of Education USA as student advising center. So we are a global network. We are located in more than 175 countries and territories. Here in India, I was looking at the registrations. There are students joining us from different parts of the country. So we are located in New Delhi, Kolkata, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Mumbai. These are the 5 cities where, in fact, the US Embassy and the other 4 US consulates are located. So any of these cities, if you ever travel or are from these, cities, reach out to our Education USA Center. We will be very, very happy to, have a discussion with you and help you guide in the application process. Another very important thing about Education USA is that all our services are free for students. That means attending those, webinars that we offer. If you want to have a one-on-one appointment with an advisor at Education USA Center, whether you have questions about whether you are on the right track of researching universities or not, or how to shortlist universities to apply eventually, we are here to help you out. To help you understand what are official and authentic sources. So reach out to us. We will be very happy to have these discussions with you. The best way to connect with Education USA is going to be through our website. This is the website, so you can just Google educationusa.in. It's a simple link. You will have all the information at the tip of your fingertips, whether you want to figure out which is the closest center to you, whether you want to see what are upcoming sessions. There will be a list of sessions under this tab called Find an Event. So keep an eye out, start attending these sessions. They can be super informative sessions going into the process of, applying to the US universities. This is the YouTube channel that I was referring to. So look for Education USA India with this symbol, the red symbol that you see on the left corner. Usually this is where most of our webinar sessions, get posted. So if you ever attend a webinar session and you're like, oh, I want to go back and check, what that professor said in the webinar session, this is where you should come. Apart from this particular theme that we are going to talk about today, there are many, many different sessions that we have done, which are relevant to the application process topics. So I would encourage everyone to check this out. We also have an app. If you are, someone who is good with, checking updates on the apps, then we have a free app that you can also download on the App Store or Google Store. We have many different services that we offer, but one of the things that can be relevant to you guys if you're applying for or planning to apply to the US universities is the daily session that we do called US Admissions 101. This is a really good starting point to get an overview of what the application process looks like, what's the timeline, how do you start that application journey. And we are also available to, during our office hours on Thursdays and Saturdays. So keep an eye out, put your questions in the chat box. And without, without further ado, I am going to quickly introduce today's guest. So today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Andrew Goodlliffe. I had a really great chat with him recently when he was visiting our Mumbai center. In fact, that is where we decided that we should do a session like this because it can be very, very helpful to Indian students. So just a little bit about Dr. Goodlliffe. He is a professor at the Department of Geological Sciences in the Arts and Science College at the University of Alabama. And in addition to that, he's also an associate dean at the graduate admissions, if I'm not wrong, of recruitment fellowships, and I think it's called Associate
Admission.
Admissions, Recruitment, and Fellowships. Now I got it. So, we have had a wonderful discussion about what are some of the things that, can really help students who are serious and passionate about academic research and, think that, applying for a PhD program is the right next step for them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Goodlliffe to take it from here. I would only request students that we would love to have your questions in the chat box. We will take them to after, Dr. Goodlliffe has finished his presentation. But I would really request keep these questions relevant to the topic so that, we can make the most out of this session. Over to you, Dr. Goodlliffe.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I very much did enjoy my visit to Mumbai and spending some time chatting with you. That was absolutely wonderful. So I'm going to be chatting today about, developing that strong PhD application. So I've already had a very nice introduction there. Do want to tell you a little bit about sort of what I do for my research, just sort of the 30-second version. You see a picture of a boat there. So my research actually takes me out onto the oceans, and I've actually done research in all the oceans of the world. And I use a technique called seismic exploration, where we actually do acoustic imaging of the seafloor and below. So I've probably spent 3 years of my life at sea doing that sort of work, and it's a lot of fun. Get to do a lot of stuff outside. I get to apply a lot of cool physics. Also want to say that one of the reasons I love speaking to international students is because I originally came to the US as an international student myself. I'm not from the US. I'm actually from United Kingdom. And I remember, trying to make sense of the US education system, trying to sort of wade through those 4,000 universities, trying to navigate the visa system and all that sort of stuff. And I know how stressful that is and how hard it is to make that move to another country. So I really do empathize with our incoming international students. And throughout my time as an associate dean in graduate school, one of my main focuses has been trying to internationalize our campus, trying to grow the number of students from India and from other countries. And so maybe sometime when I'm visiting India, I'll meet some of you. So, as was mentioned already, there's about 4,000 universities in the US. There's a lot. So finding the university that's a fit for you is hard. And it's if as you're interested in PhD programs, it's a little easier to narrow things down. So in general, in the US, you're going to find the big research universities that have, comprehensive bachelor's, master's, and doctoral, big research programs. And the University of Alabama, where I'm from, is one of those big research universities. But also there's going to be smaller regional universities that might only have a bachelor's and a master's program that they award, or might only have a bachelor's. There's private universities, there's public universities, there's different types of private universities. So sometimes, folks think, oh, private universities are, that you have to be careful of those, but there's not-for-profit private universities and there's for-profit private universities. And so the not-for-profit private universities, they're good, but those for-profit private universities, you have to kind of avoid some of those, especially at the doctoral level. Uh, One of the big ways to identify the universities that are really sort of the top research universities is to look at what we call the Carnegie ranking. So this is a national ranking of universities based on basically how many doctoral students do they produce. And the top tier of that is what we call R1. And so as someone who's looking at for a PhD program, you probably need to be looking for those R1 and R2 universities. So there's a lot of really good R2 universities as well. So that's sort of the next tier down. And really, that classification is just based on the number of PhDs they're producing. So it gives you an idea of where that university's center of gravity is. I think there's about 150 R1 universities in the US. So it's going to be the likes of the University of Alabama, the University of Michigan, University of Texas, Princeton, Harvard, all those. So we're the big ones that produce, with the big research programs, the big budgets, etc. Now, one complication is they're actually totally changing that classification system. So in the next few years, they're going to come up with a new system. But right now, trying to find those R1 and R2 universities. But really, when you're looking at PhD programs, perhaps probably what's more important is who is that advisor going to be? But let's back up a little bit. So I'm going to ask some questions as part of this presentation, and I'm going to make sure that I can see my chat box. Just one second. So question, if you're going to be a good applicant, what is one of the most important skills that you must develop? So we've got all those application materials. What are we looking at? What are we actually trying to find when we are uh, trying to identify good students? So I want you to put in the chat box, what might you think that some of the things what are some of the things that we're looking at? And there's no wrong answer here. I'm aiming for one thing particular, but there's no wrong answer to this. So what are we looking for in that application? When we review an application, what's important to us? So language proficiency, good research proficiency, ability, able to learn and apply knowledge, excellent. Persistence, wonderful. International expertise and cultural. So your reason for uh, applying for that PhD, the purpose of doing, how well you're able to communicate, that's wonderful. Critical thinking. Wow. Okay, wonderful. Critical. You guys are really good because what I'm actually looking for here is, again, there's no right answer here, and there's many things we're looking for. All of these things that you're putting into the text chat box, we're looking for. But one of sort of the central things, this is regardless of what program you're looking at, because when I looked at the list of programs that you were looking at, there was a lot of variety. But one overarching thing that we're looking for in a doctoral student is critical thinking skills. So the ability to look at a problem and actually analyze that problem and work your way through that problem. So this is one of the most important things. And we're not necessarily going to get that from one single part of the application. We're going to get that from lots of different parts. So part of it may be the emails you send to us, the sort of, the questions you're asking. Part of it may be your statement of purpose. Part of it may be those letters of recommendation. There might be other parts of that application as well. But this is what we're looking for in a good PhD student, because as a doctoral student, you're going to be thinking through a problem and coming up with a new way of doing things. So critical thinking skills are central. And so when you think about all those application materials, that's one of the big picture things we're looking at. Now let's think in more detail about those application materials. So generally, when you're applying to a place, you've got to do these things. So you're going to fill out an application form. You're going to send us some transcripts. We're going to get some letters of recommendation. You're going to write a statement of purpose. And I'm going to talk a lot about the statement of purpose. Uh, you're most likely going to provide a CV or resume, English language scores. And we never have a problem with English language scores from students from India. Uh, and really, with English language scores, all we're looking for is the minimum, the minimum score. Do you meet our minimum score? Because we have looked at the English language scores and we've determined, for example, that a 6.5 on the IELTS gives you the tools to successfully complete your degree. So there's no bonus for getting an 8 or anything like that. As long as you get that minimum, we're good. We're not going to look at that again. Now, depending on the school, you might have to provide a writing sample. This could be something that you're writing from scratch. It could be something from a class that you took. It could be a master's thesis if you've done a master's thesis. You might have to do a research proposal. At my university, we only have a couple of programs that require a research proposal. And then some universities may require an admission test score, so a GRE or a GMAT. And that is becoming less and less common in the US. So if I think, 7 years ago, all of my 160 programs required a GRE or a GMAT. Today, only about 6 or 7 of them require a GRE or GMAT. And that is a very normal pattern across the US. Less and less programs are requiring that. Okay. Just back up one. All right. Another thing is most universities are going to look at your application materials holistically. So you've probably heard this term, and I want you to put in the chat box, what does this mean? When we say we analyze your application holistically, what are we talking about? So put some things in the chat box. And again, no wrong answers here. What does it mean to analyze an application holistically? Okay, so I've got a good one there. Overall picture. Yep, excellent. Let's see what else we can get. We'll get a couple of other answers. All aspects of the application are taken into account. Yep, excellent. Let's keep going, get a few more. Well-rounded app, tech skills, skills, experience is good. Analyze the application as a whole, all related enclosures. Yeah, so exactly. So we are looking at that whole application. We're looking at the positives and the negatives that Samrat just put in there. So very often I have students email me and say, well, I have a CGPA of X. Can I get in? That is, especially for a doctoral applicant, that's not a question I can answer because that CGPA is just one part of your application. And in general, especially for the PhD, we're not going to disqualify someone based on the CGPA because they might have done lots of other really cool things. So, for example, if it's a lower CGPA, but they have published in a high impact factor uh, journal, that fact that they've published is actually far more important than their CGPA. And once you go sort of towards that PhD level, that CGPA is less and less important. So after you get your PhD and you go and talk about jobs and that sort of thing, no one is ever going to ask you about your CGPA. It's not relevant. They're going to ask you, what have you done? What have you published? So we're going to look at all of those materials holistically. And many programs that you apply to will have what they call a rubric. And it might be, they go through and they score your application. They say, okay, statement of purpose gets this score, transcripts get this score, letters of recommendation get this score. Uh, the emails that we communicated with you through, they get this score. And all those different scores are weighted. And then you come up with an overall score. Now, that's not the end of it for most programs. They're still going to look at this and uh, they're going to use other methods to rank people as well. But we're looking at everything. Okay. So overall, the goal of a graduate application is we are evaluating, do you have the potential for success at the university that you're applying to? So each part of the application measures this. So, for example, when we're looking at letters of recommendation, what are we looking for? We're looking for things like, what is your work ethic? What skills do you have? How do you work in a team, etc.? So when you're thinking about getting those letters of recommendation, it is very important that you have someone writing that letter who can talk about those sorts of things. A very common mistake in an application is that the letter of recommendation will come from a professor who the student has taken a class from, but really that professor doesn't know that student outside of the class. So that professor may say, look, this student's excellent in class. They got a B, I recommend them for graduate school. That's not a useful letter of recommendation for us because we can see that grade on your transcript. A good letter of recommendation would be something along the lines of, I had this student in class, they did really well. We had group work where that person clearly worked well with the team. I've spoken to them many times outside of class. They work in my lab. They work well with others in that setting. They have a good work ethic. They can think through problems very well. They have provided excellent input on some of our research techniques. So it needs to be something more in depth. So someone who really knows you well. Now, obviously, transcripts, we're looking at your academic performance. So what sorts of grades are you getting in classes? When you're applying for a PhD program, we're largely looking at the key indicator classes. So if you are applying to computer science, we're looking at how well did you do in the key computer science classes. It might be your interest in machine learning. How well did you do in that area? We really don't care how you did in an English literature class 5 years ago. So we're looking at those key classes. And then those writing samples. We're looking at how well do you formulate ideas and solutions, and how well do you write? Do you use good grammar, etc.? That's sort of secondary. We're largely looking for how do you think. All right, I want to spend some time on the statement of purpose because I've looked at quite literally thousands of statements of purpose. And I would probably say that 80% of them are really not written particularly well. Common mistakes with the statement of purpose are that the student tells us their life story. Now, in the United States, when you apply to a bachelor's program, you need to write an essay that really is sort of your life story. So a lot of US students especially make the mistake that thinking that the statement of purpose is really that life story. It's not. It is focused on your goals at the university that you're going to. So broadly speaking, the statement of purpose has three parts. And I always want to state that some programs may have very specific requirements. So at my university, more and more of my programs are putting on their webpage their specific requirements for the statement of purpose. So always, always, always look at the webpage of the program that you're applying to see if they have specific requirements. But broadly, again, they're going to have three parts. So number one, what have you done in the past that has prepared you for the program you're applying for? So if you're looking at, well, let's think about my own field, doing geophysics. I want to see that someone coming into a PhD program from my particular program has experience in the field. They've actually worked in the field collecting data. They've analyzed data. They've got the classwork foundation necessary for success. They may have done an internship, something like that. I'm interested in that because that's important experience. They may have worked in research labs previously. I want to know about those sorts of things. What is that foundation? Now, what they did in high school, what sports team they're on, that's not relevant because I'll need to know the stuff applicable to the program that they're going into. So what is the foundation we're going to build on? What have you done in the past? Now, this next part is what is often done poorly. Why do you want to go to this particular university, work in this particular program, and very often work for a specific faculty member? So this is where you need to do some research. So, for example, if you wanted to do materials science at the University of Alabama, you might say, I want to work at the University of Alabama. I want to come and do a PhD at the University of Alabama because it has one of the top materials science programs in the country. You're known for having some of the top equipment. You have one of the most powerful microscopes in the world. You have at least five top-ranked professors in the country. You may want to work specifically with a professor called Greg Thompson, who has done some of the premier work on organe microprobes, etc. So you're going to get down into the detail. Very often what we see is in the statement of purpose, the student has just changed the university name. This actually makes it very easy for us because that's a rejection for the student. So really do your research. Determine why you want to work for that particular program. And this is going to take some time, but it's really going to pay off. Now, also, we want to know, what do you want to do next? So what are your goals after finishing that program? And there's not really an answer that's going to disqualify you, but we want to make sure that you've thought this through. Again, we're seeing, are you serious about this? So do you want to become a professor? Do you want to go off and work for a national lab? Do you want to work in private industry? What do you want to work on? That sort of thing. And yeah, so I mean, all of these three parts are very important. So really, really think about these. And again, keep in mind that some programs may have some specific requirements. So what we're looking at is we're looking at a statement of purpose, and we want to know, why should we consider your application? Have you considered us seriously? And are your future goals a fit? And I should actually add that, when we reject applicants, it's usually not because of a low GPA. It's usually not because of test scores. It's usually because they're not a good fit. And this is something that's very important with doctoral students. Are you a good fit? Are your research goals a good fit for that particular university? So really keep that in mind. All right, so quick question just to make sure you're still awake. Which is more important, your statement of purpose or your grades? So put your answers into the chat box. Excellent. All right, people are paying attention. So without question, especially at the doctoral level, And also to some degree at the master's level, the statement of purpose is actually more important than your grades. And I was working with a professor with a presentation a while back, and he's a graduate program director. And he made the point that if a student with really good grades writes a poor statement of purpose, they are without question rejecting that student. If a student with less good grades writes a really good statement of purpose, they're considering that student. So keep that in mind. All right, so some universities are going to require some other writing samples beyond that statement of purpose. So it could be paper from a class, a published paper. And again, if you've got a published paper in a peer-reviewed high-impact journal, oh, you're going to be good because that's the sort of thing we're looking for. That's the sort of thing we're training a student to do. So if you're already doing that, we know that you can handle a PhD. And then some may do a research proposal. We want to see that you're familiar with the field. We want to see how your work might contribute to that field. And we want to see what is the gap in knowledge that you intend on filling. Because remember, as a doctoral student, you're going to be doing something that no one has done before. You're going to be coming up with a new idea, a new solution. So we want to see that you're thinking along those lines. So when we're looking at all of these pieces of writing, what are we looking at? Again, can you formulate an idea, argue for that idea, and come to a well thought out conclusion? Can you organize your thoughts clearly and coherently? And do you exhibit strong critical thinking skills? I do want to add one other thing here. When you're writing a statement of purpose, keep it brief, no more than 2 pages. We get statements of purpose sometimes that are 10, 15 pages. When we're reviewing applications, we're not going to read a 10-page statement of purpose. So again, one of the goals is we're looking for people who can write well, who can write concisely, who can get their thoughts written out well in a short amount of space. So really keep in mind that keep in mind to keep that statement of purpose short. Less important, but still important. Are you using grammar correctly? Are there issues with spelling? Now, I do want to also mention that we get a lot of questions about using AI. Don't use AI to write your statement of purpose. So, or any of your writing samples. You can use AI to sort of, clean up your grammar, clean up your spelling. So once you've written something, go into ChatGPT, say, hey, improve my grammar. We're mostly cool with that. But don't, start out with ChatGPT saying, write me a statement of purpose for chemical engineering. There's certain ways that those come out formatted that we can relatively easily see. And again, we're looking for how well can you write. So if you're using ChatGPT, really keep it to a minimum. Use it to, work through grammar, that sort of thing. That's fine, but don't start with ChatGPT. That's really not cool. Uh, CVs and resumes. Mostly you're going to submit a CV or a resume as part of your application. And so we're looking for, evidence of past success. So prior research experience, presentations at conferences, peer-reviewed publications, internships. All of these are great things to have in your application. So, I'm just looking at the chat a little bit. Does practical experience and teaching experience at undergrad, graduate level fetch any points for PhD admission? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, uh, teaching experience will not necessarily get you into a PhD program, but it might get you funding to get that to support you while you're in that PhD program if you already have teaching experience. All right, test scores. I've already mentioned that those are becoming less and less common, uh, but a lot of programs do still require these. So if a program does require a GRE or a GMAT, you need to know what is the minimum score. So, traditionally, a lot of our programs had sort of a 300. Our 5 or 6 programs that still require GRE, they've got very high requirements. Some of them are looking at 320, that sort of area. Uh, will a question to ask is, will the program still consider you with a GRE score below their threshold? And most of the good ones, most of the reasonable ones will. Uh, always, always, always take that test well ahead of that deadline. So if the application deadline is January 1, 2026, you need to be taking your GRE or GMAT the summer before. If you don't do that well, you've got time to retake it. And also you've got time to get that score to that university in a timely manner. Despite what ETS tells you that they can get the score to a university in within a week, I can tell you from thousands and thousands of test score transfers that very often it can take them a month. And so we've seen students miss deadlines because the GRE score came in too late. So just do these things early and practice, practice, practice. Really, with the GRE, a lot of it comes down to test taking technique. So I'm sure that at the Education USA office, there are resources that you can find for helping you take these tests. Read through those. Take practice tests. And again, make sure that you've practiced this a number of times before you go into the test. And then for English language scores, most commonly that's going to be TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo English test. In India, most common is IELTS. Really just getting the minimum score is all that we're looking for. And we really don't care which score that is, whether it's TOEFL, IELTS, or DET. It really doesn't make a difference. Universities have determined, again, what is the minimum score required for a student to be successful. With the GRE or GMAT, you can sort of get extra points for a higher score, but not with the TOEFL. All right, deadlines again. You can sort of guess my answer here. Apply well in advance of any deadlines. So again, if that application deadline is January 1, 2026, I want you to have your application in by September or October. Now, part of the reason for this is that, yeah, that may well be the application deadline, but there may be additional funding opportunities if you can get your application in earlier. And some programs, they may actually be admitting all the way along, and by the time they reach the deadline, funding's gone. So always, always, always apply well in advance of that deadline. 2 to 3 months is a good rule of thumb. That's when the good students are applying. For the University of Alabama, each of our programs has a different deadline. One program has a deadline in November, quite a few have deadlines in December, then the bulk of them have deadlines sort of January, February time. The bulk of our applications, however, come in October. That's our peak time for applications. When you see deadlines, departments are going to use some terminology like priority, hard deadlines, rolling deadlines. If you see a priority deadline, that means that's the deadline that you've got to apply by to be considered for funding. So if it says January 1 is the priority deadline, if you apply after that, you're not going to be considered for funding. Hard deadline, that means when they reach that date, you can't apply anymore. They will not consider your application at all. And then you're going to see rolling deadlines, where departments will just accept applications at any time. This one is a tough one for applicants because we get a lot of people who apply really late when they see rolling deadlines. And guess what? Funding's gone by that time. So always remember, applying late in the application cycle reduces the chance of funding. And the best applicants are applying in October, November of the previous year. All right. Now, another very important thing for you as a doctoral student is I'd imagine you're already doing this already, emailing professors. And you're probably getting very frustrated that they're not responding. This is a very, very common problem. So I want to give you some ideas as to how you can increase the chances of a professor responding to your email. So a lot of the emails we get, they're not written particularly well. They're not particularly well focused. They focus on funding instead of research. Don't be that student. I want you to treat the email to the professor in the same way that you would a research proposal or a statement of purpose. You're going to spend some time writing this. You're going to have other people looking at it. You're going to go to your writing center. You're going to have Education USA take a look at it. You're going to have your friends look at this. Make sure it is written really, really well. In that email, you're going to focus on your research interests and how those fit with the particular professor. And it might even be that you talk about particular papers that that professor has written and how great they are and how you enjoyed reading them. But really focus on that research fit. In that initial email, do not discuss funding. That can be distracting. Very often the emails we get start out with a request for funding and then go to the research interests. That is the sort of email that a professor will delete. They won't read it because it looks like the primary goal of the applicant is funding. So avoid that pitfall. When you are emailing a professor, if you get some interest from them and you start talking, if there's a really good fit, naturally that conversation will move towards funding. If you're looking at PhDs and you're coming from India, don't go to a place that's not funding you. Only go to those places that are funding you. And keep your email short, because if I open an email and it's 3 pages long, I'm not going to look at it there and then. I'm going to do that later. And sometimes later could be a week and a half later when I've got some time. So really put some thought into this. And these emails are effectively part of your application. Those are the things we're looking at. We're looking to see how well you formulate ideas. And in this case, the idea is that you do a PhD with us. And quite literally for us, University of Alabama, we're a very big university. We've got very advanced application systems. Your emails that you send actually get automatically attached to your application. So when we're looking at the application, we can actually see your emails. We can see how well you've written. That is part of that application. All right. Overall, how do you make sure that your writing in an application is excellent? You need to proofread everything. Anything you send, you need to make sure it's well written. Use your resources on campus. If you have a writing center or a career center, go talk to those folks. Have a current professor check for content. Again, does your writing show excellent critical thinking skills? So use all those resources. Use your friends, peers, colleagues to help you improve this writing. This is actually what we do in a professional setting. If I'm writing a paper, I'm not writing that paper in isolation. I'm doing that with other people. I'm using all these resources myself. So feel free to use those resources to help you improve your writing. Now, lastly, carefully check for any university or program specific application requirements. So when you're looking at, say, chemical engineering at the University of Texas, make sure that you know they uh, exactly what they require in an application. Every university or program is different. At the University of Alabama, again, I've got about 160 programs I administer. Each of those requires something a little bit different. They require, might require a slightly different statement of purpose. They might have an additional requirement. Some of ours have video requirements. They've switched to requiring the statement of purpose as a video instead of a written document. This is overwhelming. I know from experience, it's overwhelming for me at my own university. But I always know there's one specific person who will be able to help me with this for each program. So each program at a US university will have a graduate program director. If you have any questions about that particular program, find that person on their website and they will be able to help you with this. This is their job. It's typically a faculty member who's also serving in an administrative role. The graduate program director is the one who knows exactly what they're looking for. And it might be they say, hey, look, you're not a good fit for our program. You need to apply somewhere else. That's not a rejection. That's just them saying, hey, based on your interests, you need to go over here instead of here. And for me, if a student approaches me and their particular interests are not a fit with the University of Alabama, I'm always happy to recommend other universities. So graduate program director is a very important person for you. Find that person if you have any questions. All right, before I look at some of the questions, I do want to quickly tell you a little bit about my own university. So the University of Alabama is the flagship public research university of the state of Alabama. We are the big university in Alabama. We're founded in 1831, so we've been around almost 200 years. We're a Carnegie R1 research university. We have about 41,000 students. Of those, about 6,000 are graduate students. And then we have 150 plus, and again, it's more like 160 master's and doctoral programs. And about 70 of those are PhD programs. We have international students from about 80 different countries, and we've been gradually growing the number of international students on campus. And then we have this big, beautiful campus. It's a 1,300-acre campus. If you were to walk around the circumference of the campus, it's about 6 kilometers to walk around the campus. So it's a huge area, just big, beautiful, gorgeous campus. It's a lovely, lovely place to work. The picture on the right-hand side is our mascot of the university. So our mascot is an elephant. And as you come into the university, this is one of the entrances where we have that big bronze elephant statue, which is probably about 3 times life size of an elephant. Now, what is the University of Alabama known for? So we do a lot of things really, really well. But we are known as a university that produces CEOs. So our alumni are leaders in industry, technology, literature, the arts, entertainment, and sports. If you look at large corporations in the US, very often there is someone from the University of Alabama who is near the top or at the top. So if we look at Shell Oil or Lockheed Martin or Occidental Petroleum or Discovery Channel or PricewaterhouseCoopers, they all have or had CEOs who are University of Alabama alumni. We have a lot of highly ranked programs, especially in our business school. There are programs which are top 10, top 20 in the country. Uh, Advertising and public relations, we have the top program in the country. Some areas of research that we really excel at, material science and water research. We have perhaps the best groups in those fields in the country, if not the world. Certainly water research, we are probably number one in terms of the faculty and the research facilities that we have. Now, outside of the academic realm, we also have world-class athletic programs. So the University of Alabama is known as perhaps one of the top athletic universities in the country. Now, our American football team, we didn't have that great a year, but in the past, we have typically, at least in the last 10 years, we typically have been the national champions. What that translates into for you is amazing recreation and sport facilities that are second to none in the country. And then, if you're on campus, especially during the fall, you have these big football matches where maybe 300,000 people are coming to campus. It's an amazing experience. And then we have this amazingly beautiful campus. It is honestly a wonderful place to work. I'm actually blessed to work here each day. Uh, it's lovely just walking through campus. It's a wonderful environment. And then as you're looking for universities, very often students are focused on sort of places like New York or California. And there's nothing wrong with those places, but they're expensive. And it's a very particular lifestyle. I do encourage you to look at universities in the US Southeast because it is probably the friendliest part of the US. We talk about Southern hospitality. Uh, and I've lived all over the world. I've lived all over the US. And honestly, I can say the south of the US is the friendliest place that I've lived. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up there. I do want to say that as an attendee for this session, I will waive the application fee if you do decide that you're going to apply to the University of Alabama. I'll be very excited to hear from you if that's the case. All I'd need you to do is email me directly at amg@ua.edu. And what I'm going to ask you to do if you are applying for fall, and it's for a PhD program, it's getting late to apply for fall. Drop me an email. As soon as you're ready to submit your application, I'll go in and waive the application fee. Just tell me you came here. But I'll finish there, and I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. I probably talked too much.
No, this is great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And there are some wonderful questions in the chat box, but I'm going to get started with this one, kind of a fundamental question, to be honest, is, um, PhD program is a right fit for whom? Who should be thinking about, that, I should apply for a PhD program? And perhaps you can elaborate on this with your own example. How did you decide that you want to apply for a PhD program? And I want to, before I get there, I want to give you a context that a lot of times in the Indian context, PhD degree next to your name is considered to be a good, job seeker, right? And so, but from the US, academic culture's point of view, that's not the case. There is a very specific objective, when you decide that PhD is the right next step for you. So would you elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, it's kind of fun for about a couple of days. It's kind of a novelty to have that PhD next to your name, and then you're like, eh. uh, for me, the reason I did a PhD was I wanted to have more freedom to do what I want to do. And when I started my bachelor's, I had no intention whatsoever of going into academia. But I ended up doing a master's, and my goal was absolutely just to finish with a master's and go into industry. I was going to go work in the oil industry. But I had a couple of really cool experiences which changed my mind. Number one was just doing that master's research was a lot of fun. And then number two, I actually went and worked in the oil industry for a short while. And it was great. I made a lot of money. They were paying me a ridiculous amount of money. Uh, and we were doing cool stuff. And I was actually working in the research end of the oil industry. But at the end of the day, I had a boss who said, hey, this project you're working on, stop. We're going to go do this other thing. And I could see that there was so much potential. And I really wanted to work on this one thing because it's exciting and it was something new, but I did not have the flexibility in that environment to go further with that. And so really working in industry for a while told me that I needed to go work some, I needed to get to the point where I had more flexibility. So I went back, I got my PhD, and with a PhD, you can go into academia, you can go into industry. I took the academic route, obviously, and it's it's so much fun because I can do what I want to do. I choose the research projects. I'm my own boss. If I want to go work in India to do research, I can decide to go work in India to do research. I don't have to go to my boss in the oil industry. So for most people in the US, they're doing the PhD because it gives you freedom, more freedom than just going and working for a company and doing what your boss does until you retire. Boss tells you to do. So it's all about that freedom to do what you want to do, to follow your passion. When I'm looking for a good PhD student, I want someone who has that passion, that drive. They're excited. They want to do more. Uh, that's really sort of my story.
That's great. And I think, I'll just add a little bit to that, one of my mentors, told me that if you have a question that keeps you up at night, and you really want to, find the kind of, explore, and you're curious to explore that particular research question, then, that tells you PhD probably is the right, next step for you.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, that personal anecdote with us, Andrew. The next question, and guys, I'm going to get to your questions in the chat box, but there are some questions that I, very often come across, and I would like to get some clarifications for those questions because those are very common. So, as you know, in India, the education system can be quite stratified, and
Mhm.
not everyone, has access to, say, research resources, even when you are doing a master's, level program. As you were, elaborating on the point of, how some universities might require you to draft a writing sample, a lot of times, which is based on probably the research that you did, during your bachelor's program or during your master's. But a lot of students know who come from tier two, tier three, cities don't necessarily, have that kind of access, Andrew. So in such cases, what would you advise for those students? How can they really strengthen their application when sometimes they have the potential, but necessarily not the resources at hand?
Oh, absolutely. So, a lot of our doctoral students, I mean, even students coming from the US, they might be coming from a smaller university that just does not have the research facilities that we have. Uh, Really, in this situation, again, I'm looking for that passion in the application. When I read the statement of purpose, I want to see excitement. And I've had many PhD students work for me that don't necessarily have an extensive research background. But when I saw their statement of purpose and I saw those letters of recommendation, I saw excitement. And I remember one particular student who came from a small university in Tennessee. He did not have the research background, but I remember looking at his letters of recommendation and going, oh my God, this guy looks really good. And I actually called up his old advisor. And I actually said, hey, look, this guy, he's not the sort of student we would usually accept. We might be looking for more research experience, but I can see a lot of potential here. And he's asking a lot of really cool fundamental questions in his application materials. And we accepted him, and I can tell you without question, he is the best student I have ever had. And he now runs a remote sensing satellite company and is making millions of dollars a year. He went into academia for a while. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so what we saw was that potential in the statement of purpose and in the letters of recommendation. And that phone call I made to his advisor was one of the best phone calls I ever made.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I'll also add that, from my personal experience, coming from a very small town, we don't have necessarily access to those resources, but that does not mean you should not do your homework. We have, now access to internet, even in smaller cities. So if you have questions, as you were pointing out, different things about what makes the application strong, Andrew, I was thinking about the journey to actually apply for PhD programs starts way before you even finish your application. That means if you think that you have the passion for academic research, think about what you can do during the 2 years of your master's program here in India.
Absolutely.
You do have to go out of your comfort zone. If you think your school does not have enough resources, reach out to someone else and find opportunities where you can engage and expose yourself to, even if it is basic research, expose yourself to that. Try and read. Reading in academia is so much, far more important sometimes. And once you get into PhD programs, you will realize most of your nights are going to be reading those journal articles, before you prepare your grant applications or, your research, proposal and things like that. Okay,
And
I'm
and
going to,
and, and
yeah,
that and
yeah,
that and that late night reading is not a chore because
yes,
you want to do that. You're passionate about it.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I do
Um,
want to say one other thing. You mentioned comfort zone. When I'm giving presentations to students at the University of Alabama about this, I have a diagram that tells a little bit about my own story. And the slide has a circle which says my comfort zone, and then there's a dot over on the other side of the slide, and that's where I am.
mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're ready for something like that, then, yes, PhD would be the right way because PhD path is not a linear path. There is, especially in sciences, you will realize no matter what your hypothesis is, what your research question is, you're probably going to end up somewhere else from where you started, you're asking that research question. Okay,
Usually you end up somewhere else.
exactly, exactly. I still remember, for my PhD thesis presentation, I had this diagram where it's almost like, a jigsaw puzzle where you're trying to find this way, but you don't actually end up where you thought you were going to end up. You end up somewhere else. Anyway, so we have an interesting question here. Someone asking that, who's had, I think this is from Kishore, who's saying that they've had 14 years of experience in climate change and energy efficiency. I'm assuming this is in industry setting, and they seem to be interested in applying for a PhD program. Can you maybe elaborate? Is age a bar? Having so much of experience, is that something that makes this candidate overqualified? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So age is absolutely not a bar. It is not a consideration when we are looking at PhD applicants. In fact, if you look at our doctoral students, the average age of our doctoral students is about 35. There's a lot who come directly, but there's a lot who go off and work in industry or wherever for a few years. And when we see applicants that have that extensive industry experience, we know they're going to be good because they've had that experience. They might be making lots of money now, and they have made the difficult decision that because of their passion, they're going to step into academia, and for a few years, they're not going to make much money. That's a difficult decision. So we love it when we have students coming from industry. Uh, we actually have quite a few PhD students on campus who are ex-CEOs. They've finished their career, they've retired early, and they've decided to just go have fun with a PhD.
Very interesting.
We had one in mechanical engineering. I can't remember the name of the company. It's a big company. I mean, it's a company with many thousands of employees. And he said, okay, I'm done with this. I've done this. I want to just go have fun, do a PhD, pursue my passion.
That's
Uh,
great. That's
yeah.
very interesting. Um, it is, very often, Andrew, I get this question from students that, I'm really very, passionate about academic research, but I'm just finishing my bachelor's program. Can I directly apply for a PhD program? What is your take on that? How can students, think about, directly applying for a PhD program? And how do universities kind of really review such applications?
So, absolutely, a student can go directly from a bachelor's to a PhD. It's somewhat dependent on the field. Uh, computer science, for example, it's very normal for students to go directly from a bachelor's to a PhD. Uh, in my own field, in geology, probably about 50% of the students are coming directly from a bachelor's. If a student is coming from a bachelor's, though, we probably really do need to see something that shows that they can do research. And so it could be just working in a research lab, a good letter of recommendation from that supervisor in the research lab. Uh, there's really excellent students in the US and internationally who they've gone and presented at conferences. And so there we're seeing that that student is going above and beyond. They're doing more than is required for them. You can see they've got a passion and they're pursuing that passion. Uh, so really, if they're coming directly from a bachelor's, just seeing evidence that they're going, again, above and beyond, they're doing more than's required of them and they're doing it well.
So, I just want to check with you, Andrew, that you do have some time because there are still a bunch of
Oh, yeah.
questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, great. There is a follow-up question to that asking that, oh, but whether you will choose a bachelor's, student application over a master's student application. And before you answer, I'll just, say about this that every case, every application is a unique application. And it is not just the degree that matters, but really what you have done to kind of show why you are a right fit for the program. But tell us, a little bit more about, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, just because a student has a master's, it doesn't mean that they're a better candidate for a PhD. Again, it's what have they done? What have they done with this? If a student's just gone and got a master's and it's a coursework master's, and I really can't see that they've done anything extra, they're at no advantage to a student with just a bachelor's. Uh, and so again, it's really what you say. What have you done? It's not about just those academic qualifications. And it's the same, at the end of the PhD, if you're looking to go into academia, if you don't have those publications and everything, you're not going to get a job. So it's what have you done?
Absolutely. I have, one more question for you. And this might be typical in the STEM areas, when students are applying for PhD programs, specifically in the US universities, that the structure of the PhD program can vary, even within the program at various universities. So, say someone applying for a PhD program in biological sciences at X university, the structure might tell you that, oh, you might have lab rotation, so you don't have to have a particular professor chosen before you even apply to the program, as opposed to the traditional PhD, applications where you need to know if this professor actually would have space in their lab, before you apply. So can you tell us a little bit how this actually works?
Yeah, and as you say, it works differently with each program. So, for example, our own biology program, and I know your field is biology, our own biology program, as part of the application, you are absolutely required to identify a professor. If you don't do that, you will be rejected. But it may well be at another university. I mean, if I think about our chemistry program, they do lab rotations. You absolutely do not identify a professor as part of your application. And so there are so many different ways that departments do this, and I have a hard time keeping track of it on my own university campus. So this comes back down to that key person, which is the graduate program director. They are your source for information on that campus. What is required? I'll tell you a very quick, funny story. So most of our STEM fields, you're expected to email professors, that sort of thing. That's the case for most of our uh, uh, STEM programs. I was approached by our graduate program director for our political science program, and they said, you need to put something on the graduate school webpage to tell students not to email professors. And I'm like, excuse me? She's like, yes, these students keep emailing us. We will not answer an email until they've been admitted. And to her, it was news that normally students are required to email those professors. But in their particular field, that was not the norm at all. And so it's very different on each campus. Grad program director is your key person to find out.
Absolutely. And I think this is a very important point because researching universities, researching right programs takes time. Getting the hang of how to navigate a web page is also going to take some time.
Yep.
So hence, we at Education USA, we tell students that you have to start at least a year and a half before you plan to join the classes in the US, because that's how long it takes. Another
Absolutely.
point, Andrew, and you can add to this, that a lot of times, when I'm interacting with students, specifically the ones who are interested in applying for PhDs, they're fixated on the fact that, oh, I really like this one faculty member at this particular university, and I really want to just apply there. And usually my advice to them is that you should, have at least 2 or 3 faculty members who are working in the similar research area. It doesn't have to be a specific research question that you're interested in. But in case if that faculty does not have space in their lab, if you have potential 2, 3 faculty members, they might consider your application. Please tell us from the university's perspective, how does this work?
Well, this is very true. So, if there's a particular professor that you're looking at, it's quite likely they just don't have space in their research group. Uh, for myself, I could only typically have 4 or 5 students anytime. I just didn't have the space or the resources for additional students. So even though a student might want to work on a specific project with me, they may be fantastic. They may be the best student who's ever applied, but I just don't have space. So having some alternatives. When I applied to PhD programs, there was one I really wanted, and it's actually the one I got, which I was very, very lucky there. But I did have 2 or 3 backup universities, which were still very good. They weren't exactly what I wanted, uh, but having options, and yeah, you may be interested in a very specific topic now, but the details of that are probably going to change later on. For
Absolutely.
me, I was interested in a very specific technique uh, to analyze data. I really hadn't thought through the details of the research. I knew what I wanted to work on, but not what was the outcome. So, yeah.
Absolutely. One of the questions that I had seen in the audience was that how in advance should we start emailing professors? I don't think there is a deadline as to how early you should start. But do you have any advice for students?
Uh, I think as early as possible. I mean, it's if you're looking at fall 2026, it's not too early. To have those initial conversations. I mean, every day I'm talking to students who are looking at fall 2026 now. Most of them are fall 2025, but uh, it's okay to start talking early. Uh, and that also, if that professor really likes you
Yeah,
and there's not space now, they can actually work to sort of make space in the next year.
absolutely.
So having that conversation, and 99% of professors really enjoy having those conversations. If these are good, well-formulated conversations, they're fun. And
Um,
don't hesitate to request a
yeah,
uh, Zoom chat. I love
absolutely.
talking to prospective
Absolutely.
students over
Um,
Zoom.
and I would add to that the more you research university websites, the program websites, the faculty profiles, you will realize that, a lot of professors in the US, take an effort, go to an extent to have their own lab web pages where
Oh
they
yeah,
not only have information about the projects that they are working on, but they might have a note for prospective student who wants to join the lab. And so do your due diligence, do meticulously do this research, deep dive in a particular program and really ask yourself. I keep telling students this that, there are all kinds of professors at US universities. Some might have a big lab, group of, say, 20 students. Some might have only two. But the question that you want to ask is, are you fit in a big, research group? Or are you someone who thrives, is more hands off and wants to be part of a smaller research group? So those are the questions that you're not going to find these answers on the website. These are the questions that you need to ask yourself. Because at the end of the day, the success of your PhD program will also depend on how clear you are as to what environment you thrive in, right? So this is something that students should think about. I see a comment here that Narvada has said that, ma'am, let please let the professor talk. I'm sure I'm giving Andrew enough opportunities. I like to share my personal insights because I did my PhD in the US as well, and some of those experiences can also be critical. There is one.
absolutely. I know in my conversations with you, you have a lot of insight here, which
Thank you, Andrew.
these folks can really benefit from.
There is one question that, I think one topic that we didn't get to talk about is financial support for PhD students at US universities. Can you just give, an overview how, universities support their PhD students financially?
Absolutely. And so the first thing is don't go to a university if they're not offering you financial support. At the PhD level, you want to get financial support. Now, typically, a university at the PhD level, and again, typically, some are different, they're going to, if you get admitted to a PhD program with funding, that funding is going to include all of the tuition. It's going to include some living expenses. Many universities nowadays will also provide health insurance because that can be expensive in the US. And then a lot of US universities, there's a lot of other fees as well. And so many of the universities will also cover those fees. And so for us, and again, the bulk of universities, it's going to cover all of your costs. Now, the living expenses, yeah, you're not going to be living particularly richly. Uh, it's not, it's going to be fairly basic, uh, but you should be okay. I mean, if I think about our biology program, for example, you get full tuition, health insurance, fees, and about $30,000 a year, which in Tuscaloosa is great. You can live on as a student on $30,000 a year. Now, if you had that same stipend in or same salary in California or New York, you would not be able to live on that. And so I do want to emphasize that there is a huge range in how much it costs to live across the US. I used to live in Hawaii. So before I lived in Alabama, I actually spent about 15 years in Hawaii. Hawaii is one of the more expensive places to live in the US, comparable with New York or California. Uh, I would have to earn twice as much as I do now to live comparably in Hawaii or California. And so when you're looking at different places, take into account the cost of living. Now, some things to watch out for. Some universities will only pay the in-state portion of the tuition. So some Texas universities, for example, they pay your tuition, but only the in-state portion. What do I mean by that? So each public university typically has an in-state tuition rate and an out-of-state tuition rate. So at the University of Alabama, our in-state rate is $6,000 a semester. Our out-of-state rate is $16,000 a semester. So we cover the whole amount, the 16,000, but if we only covered the in-state portion, you would have to pay an additional $10,000 a semester. So keep an eye out for that sort of thing. Make sure that any university you get admitted to is paying all of your tuition. And again, keep an eye out for those things like fees. So in the
Absolutely.
US, we talk about tuition, which is the big amount, and then the fees are the little add-ons. And so for us, that can be $1,000 a semester. And so, by covering that, we're saving the students a lot of money as well. Health insurance, if you don't get health insurance, uh, the actual cost for us for health insurance, we have fairly cheap health insurance, is about $2,500 a year. I just saw one of our other universities in Alabama is $4,000 a year for health insurance. So these things can be expensive. So make sure that you know what it's what an offer is covering.
And this is something, again, as you said, Andrew, that students can get in touch with the program director. If you can't find this information on the website, sometimes you have to dig a little bit to find this kind of information, but you will be able to find that information. There was a really good question in the chat here. Someone had asked that, what if my, say, master's thesis topic is not really relevant to or directly related to the topic they want to research for the PhD? Um, uh, can you weigh, like, does it matter? Does that make their application weak?
So that's actually a really good question. I love that one. Uh, Actually, it doesn't, in many cases, it doesn't particularly matter because we're looking for evidence that you can do research and that you have passion. And so it's very common in many fields that students are coming from a different field. Uh, I mean, computer science, we have a lot of computer science students that come from different fields. Their master's thesis, if they got a master's, might not be directly in computer science, but we can see evidence from that master's that they have been successful. They have been successful in research. And so that's really what's important. More commonly, we might have a bachelor's student who did undergrad research in a totally different field. I actually don't care about that. I can see evidence that they've done research and they've been successful.
And I might add to that, when you start your PhD program, the first couple of years, you will be taking a lot of different courses. And that's, where you're going to learn about, the fundamental theories, that go into that particular field of study. And you will be using that knowledge to really prepare your research question as well. So don't be under impression that, when you get into a PhD program, you don't start your research on day one. You're going to have all these resources. And in fact, and you can add to this, Andrew, but when you are a graduate PhD student at a US university, you have two kinds of committees that overlook your progress. You have an academic committee, and then you have a dissertation committee to make sure that you are on the right track. You're taking the classes that are required for the fulfillment of the program. And then eventually the dissertation committee that looks after, are you doing your research? What are the challenges that you are facing? Do you need to tweak your research question? Isn't that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, and that first couple of years where there's a lot of classes there, that's where we're giving you the tools to be successful. We're teaching you about the research methods that you're going to use. We're teaching you about the background. You're in seminars where professors are talking about the recent research, that sort of thing. We don't expect people to come in fully able to do this. The reason you do a PhD is to come in and learn how to do this.
So,
We're
again, one of my mentors had told me, Andrew, that you're not expected to be an expert when you begin the
oh
PhD
no,
program. You're
no,
expected to become one at the end of the PhD in that very small niche, field that you are researching. So don't be under
absolutely.
assumption that you have to be an expert at the beginning.
No, no, and we're looking, when we look at your background in the application, we're looking at potential for success. And part of that may be because you've done some really cool things already, but do you have the foundation necessary to be successful in a PhD program? That's the question we're trying to address in the application.
That's great. I think we are well ahead, ahead of time. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in the website for Education USA. So students can, go to this website, find out the nearest Education USA center. I'm located in the Mumbai center. So if you have specific questions, you can reach out to me. I'll be happy to help out. I know that we couldn't get to all the questions, but we really appreciate that you were attentive and asking all those questions. But, I don't want to hold off Andrew for too long either. This is just the start of his day. And he's been very, very generous, sharing a lot of insightful information with us. So, Andrew, thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this session. I hope that, students found this informative. Any last two words for the students who are planning to apply for their PhD programs?
Well, it's always a lot of fun doing these sorts of sessions. I love doing these. I did put my contact information into the chat box. And again, by attending this, if you apply to the University of Alabama, email me and I will waive the application fee. I can only waive the application fee when you're sort of ready to submit. So, don't email me saying, hey, I'm going to be applying in fall 2026. But that offer is open. Uh, Hopefully, again, we're looking for those students that have passion. We're looking for those students who are going to come up with the next big thing. And I always think back to a really good presentation given by one of our alumni, who's actually the chief strategy officer for Google. And she comes in and she says, okay, when she did her degree at the University of Alabama, her field, the company she works for now, did not exist. The concept of Google did not exist. But what she did is she did her degrees and her work in such a way that it prepared her for the thing that was coming next. So even though some of you may be thinking, okay, I want to do AI and machine learning, that's sort of the big thing now. But what's the big thing in 20 years that you're going to be doing that we haven't even thought about now? So as you're preparing yourself, don't sort of, you know, pigeonhole yourself into this little field that exists now. Think about how can I prepare myself for what's coming next? And you, as a PhD student, are probably the person who's going to come up with that thing that's coming next. And that is what's really exciting. Because when I'm admitting PhD students, I know that these people are going to be people, some of these folks are going to be famous. These folks are going to be doing great things. They are going to be discovering new things. That's the sort of PhD student we're looking for.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you to the audience. We really hope that you were able to get some really good information that will, take you through this application journey. And I'll again remind, we keep doing these sessions. We have a great session that we did on communicating with, professors and faculty at US universities that is on
Very
our YouTube
important.
channel. That is a very important, a session to watch. There was a question in the chat asking, up something about emailing. And I'll say that please don't send email saying hi in the subject line.
Exactly.
Be professional when you're communicating with professors.
I always love the ones that say, Dear Prof. I mean, like, really? Come on.
But thank you
Don't do
again.
that.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful evening if you're joining us from India. Take care, Andrew.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you all.